Hi everyone, this is Jacob Stamball, the VP Internal of Texas Engineering and World Health, and today I will be recreating the 3D solar collector that we made during GM3 as the second and final round of our workshops that we held. And so just to give you a preview of what we will be creating today, this is what the final product should look like. It's a little prototype solar collector that we will be using for the autoclave project. And so let's get started. So to begin, once you open up AutoCAD, it should look something like this, just your plain 2D dimension, no sketches or anything. And so the first thing we want to build is the base of the solar collector. And so we're going to hit Sketch, and you can click any plane, it doesn't really matter. And so I'm going to click this plane, and then I'm going to hit 2-point rectangle to begin. And you always kind of want to start at the origin, just because that's somewhere central and you know that's like a certain fixed locked place in this like 3D, 2D dimensions. And so the first one rectangle is going to be here, and I'm going to draw my second point here to make more of a square actually than a rectangle. And once again, it doesn't matter with the exact dimensions, as long as you get something close to what I'm drawing, it should be fine. The actual numbers don't matter. And so one thing it's important to note, like after you draw your first rectangle, is that the tool is still selected, and if you actually don't know this, if you try to like continue on, sometimes it'll be quite annoying, because like for the next step, if I wanted to like write or click this line, it won't let me because it's still trying to draw more rectangles. So to unselect the tool, you can always hit Escape, and so now the tool is no longer selected. And so now we're going to be fully defining the sketch, and what to fully define a sketch means is so that when you try to click and drag it from any one end, it won't move. And in this case, this is not fully defined because it moves. And one easy way to tell if your sketch is fully defined is if it has these blue or black lines. So if you notice, if I try to click and drag the black lines, it won't move. And so typically the easiest way to fully define sketches is either to set the specific lengths of the sketch to be certain numbers, or using these constraints. And so for this case, we will be using a combination of the both. So the first thing we want to do is use this equal constraint to set these two sides of the square equal to each other. And you can see it actually automatically changed it to make it equal. And once again, you want to hit Escape to get rid of the equal tool. And now to fully define it, we're going to right click one of the edges and we're going to hit Sketch Dimension. And so with the sketch, you can do this with any of the sides. And you can always use sketch dimensions for any kind of like dimension you want, any angle, any point from a line, or anything like that. In this case, I'm going to do the sketch dimension of one side. And it'll ask me what I wanted to define it as, but in this case 50 is what we want it to be equal to this side. So now you can see that the lines turn black from blue, and so when I try to stretch it out, it won't let me. And so our base is done, so we're going to hit Finish Sketch, and now you should have just a square here. And so we want to make this square 3D, and your best tool to do this is always going to be not Press Pull. Press Pull is another tool you can use, but I typically try to stay away from that because it doesn't have as much features as the Extrude. Because if you click Press Pull, it only allows you to do like just basically creating a 3D shape, but Extrude has a lot more like tools and functions you can see here, so it's typically more useful to always go with Extrude. And so you're going to extrude it some height. In this, you can manually extrude it like how I'm doing here, or you can also type it in over here. In this case, I want it to be not 50, but 5. My AutoCAD has been set to millimeters. Yours will probably be in inches or something. It doesn't really matter in this case, since we're just kind of designing something, but as you can tell, like millimeters would be really small, so this is not very ideal. And so everything else looks fine. We want to start at the profile where we clicked. We only want to go one side. We want to manually extend the distance, and we want a new body. So we hit OK. So now you can see we have our base here. And if you're wondering how I'm panning around this object, you can, if you're I would suggest using a mouse whenever you're CADing, just makes things a lot simpler. But if you click on if you scroll up and down the pinwheel, it zooms in and out. But if you press the pinwheel down, it allows you to drag around. And then if you hit shift and the pinwheel, it allows you to pan around like this, so you can see any face or side you want. And if you don't have a mouse and you still want to do these things, you can always just left click this square and rotate it around. And you can also, I typically use this to like orient myself because it has these useful arrows and stuff like that. But moving forward, also another really useful tool before I move forward is clicking these little folders here, and you can hide, like this, in this case, the sketch where we just previously did was already hidden, but you can choose to hide and unhide certain things that you've drawn or created thus far. And so the next part we're going to do is creating the legs of the solar collector. And to do that, we're going to create a sketch onto the top surface of our base. And so, while that may not appear to be evident why I'm doing what I'm doing in the order, it'll make sense later. So the very first thing we want to do is we want to draw a circle right in the middle of this square. And so to do that, you can drag your cursor around the edges, and you can see it a lot of the times AutoCAD allows you to, it tells you where you're at, so you don't have to like zoom in very closely to see if you're on the line or not, because in this case a little X appears when you're attaching to another sketch, and the square appears when you're attaching to like an edge, like a 90-degree edge. And for the case of midpoint of a line, the little triangle appears. And so in this case, we want to do the midpoint, which if you drag your cursor, it should appear the triangle. And if you keep following that dashed line, it should get you to these two dashed lines, which is the middle point of this square. And so we want to draw a 20 millimeter square. And then we are going to draw some lines from the corners like this. Actually, instead of drawing horizontally like that, we are going to draw them from the edge to the center like this, and we're just going to repeat for all four sides. And the reason we do this is because, as you can see, it fully defined the inner circle, and that's just because these all have to be a certain distance from the center point. But however, when you hover over these lines, you can see it created a bunch of weird geometries. Like, we don't want this weird, like, almost trapezoid thing. And so what we're going to do is we're going to right click these lines that we created and make them sketch dimensions. And so to do that, you just right click and you hit normal construction. And if you want to do all of them at once, you can control click multiple things and then hit normal construction. And so what this does, rather than just drawing the lines horizontal, it still fully defines the circle, but now you can see, like when I hover over, it doesn't hover, it gives them the whole area of like the square and the circle rather than like that weird trapezoid that we were getting earlier. So these like constructions lines allow us to do special geometries without really having to worry about like creating weird other shapes that we may or may not want. And so it's a pretty useful tool for sketching, highly recommend using. But moving forward, we're going to add the 4 legs of our solar collector. And so to do that, you're going to draw 4 circles of, we don't care where you put them on the line right now, we'll fix it, but we do care about the diameter, so we'll make them 10 millimeters. So again, doesn't matter where you put it, just put 4 circles anywhere on these lines, but do make sure they are attached to the line itself, and to make sure you just have to see that X. It doesn't have to be the midpoint, but just make sure you see that little X hash. And so now, obviously we don't want this like legs to be asymmetrical, like it won't be very structurally sound. And so what we're going to do is we're going to click the center of the circle and control click, which allows us to click multiple things at once, the edge of the square, and we're going to right click and hit sketch dimension. Now we're going to define the length of this sketch. And one important thing to notice here is, in this case, where the sketch is right now, it's doing the distance from like a diagonal kind of line. So it's doing it from exactly from the edge to the center of that circle. But if I move my mouse over here, you can see it shifts. And so the difference here is that this length that it's measuring, this 11.155 is actually like the distance on the y-axis from the point, while this 15.775 is like the diagonal distance from the two. And so you can do either or, but just make sure you do it consistent for all 4 circles to make sure it's symmetrical. And in this case, I'm going to do the diagonal and we'll make it 10, also 10 millimeters away. So you can see it automatically does that for us. And so then, now that the sketch dimension tool is already selected, you can just click 2 things and it'll automatically do it for you. So we're going to repeat this again for all 4 points, or all 4 legs. So and so now we have like all the legs are pretty symmetrical to each other. As you can see, they're all 10 millimeters away from the edge. And so this looks fine, so we're going to hit finish sketch. And now we are going to, like create this kind of like slanted rising, because if you were just to do like an extrude, if you were just to do an extrude here, you couldn't really get like that angle even if you tried. I actually never used taper angles. Let's see what this does. A taper angle just does like columns basically, but you could see like we can't really get this like diagonal kind of extrusion just by doing a normal extrusion. And so to do this, we're going to do like to do those special kind of legs, we're going to do it in a 2-step process. And the first part is to extrude this base so it gives us like a reference point to where to extrude these legs to. And that's why it was also really important to do this very symmetrically. And so if we just try to normally extrude, it'll do it from here. And while you can do it like this and then kind of cut away the bottom part later on, a very easy way to do what we're trying to do is not to start, when you extrude, not to start from the profile plane, but to offset the plane. And what this does is, if I type a number, it'll be very apparent. It automatically offsets like what we're trying to. Let me move this so you can see it better. Actually, let me extrude this by quite a bit. So what offset does, as you can see, it like starts extruding from some distance away from the plane where we selected. And in this case, the plane that we selected was the top face of the base. And we offsetted it by 50 millimeters, which allows us to give us this distance. And so you want to offset it by some distance, preferably a little bit higher than usual. And we're only going to extrude it, again, we don't even have to do 5 millimeters because this is just like a little, kind of almost like a geometry. So we'll do just 1 millimeter. And once again, we want a new body. And so now we have, should be naming these to keep track. We have our base, and we have, we'll call this our upper base. This upper base is not too important, as you'll see right now. And like when we extruded, one thing AutoCAD usually does is it hides the sketches after you're done with it. But in this case, we're not actually done with the sketch. We still have quite a bit more stuff to do. So we're gonna like make it visible again. And so now we're going to almost extrude, but the feature is called Loft. And so what Loft does, let me see if it has a good definition here. It says the Loft creates traditional, okay, that's not a really good definition, but basically what Lofting does, it allows you to create some pretty cool extrusions. Like let's say you wanted to connect, like in this case, well, let me look at it, but if you wanted to connect like that square to a circle. Like, you couldn't normally do that, but the Loft feature will automatically calculate like the best kind of shape to do that. And the Loft also will, like as we'll see right now, you can choose this face and this face, and it'll automatically create the best shape to connect these two stuff. So you typically use Loft when you're connecting like kind of weird geometries. And so when I click Loft, it's going to ask us for what profiles we want to loft. And in this case, we want to loft this circle, and we also want to loft this. And so you can see it automatically creates like this shape for us. And that's like going to be the best geometry possible. And if you don't think it's the best geometry possible, which is like highly doubtly that CAD messed it up, but you can also choose like this. You can rotate like the tangent line of where it's going to go. In this case, like it creates like this non-geometry when you move it completely opposite, but you can kind of like rotate it if you want to make like some interesting geometries. In this case, like we'll just leave it normal. And if you're having issues lofting, this typically what happens is it'll automatically go to Rails. And what Rails does is it kind of helps the Loft figure out which geometry you want to go to. So one thing I could have done was draw some kind of line like from here to this shape, and then tell the Loft, oh, follow this line when you create this geometry. But in this case, I didn't do that because that would have been a little complicated. So make sure you don't accidentally click some rails, and if you do, just select it and hit the X. In this case, we only want 2 planes. And also in this case, it'll be okay to join. Typically you don't want to, but we'll see why later on this is important. So for now, we'll hit OK. And so now we're going to repeat the same lofting process for all the circles. But as you can kind of already see, it's going to be hard to click this underface because this is in the way. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to hide it for now. And so while it looks kind of weird because they combined the bodies right now, just make sure you're going like in some kind of order so you're not relofting the same thing. In this case, I started on the upper left, and I'm just going to go clockwise. So to do that, once again, I'm going to go to Create, Loft. We're going to select this, and then, ooh, actually I realized this is my mistake, sorry. We are going to go over here, and we're going to click Edit Feature, and we're actually not going to join them yet. We're just going to do New Body. And this will make it easier for when we're doing all of them, because now we can hide just the leg and have this still available. I apologize for that. So we're going to hit Loft. Once again, click that circle, click that, New Body, and we hit OK. Now we have 2 legs. As you can see, the geometries are contacting each other. And for this case, it's okay. Fuck me. Hi everyone, sorry, I apologize. There was a little issue with the recording software, but so far where I left off was we had just relofted a second leg. And I was explaining how as you can see, like when you highlight the 2 bodies, like there's a little bit of contact overlay over them. And for now it's okay, it's not like ideal, but AutoCAD recognizes that like it's okay. It's not like creating any like weird like black holes or anything, so it'll allow it. But moving on, we're going to continue to loft the other 2 legs to create the overall base. And so to do that, we're going to hide these 2 again. We're going to go over to Loft, click the 2 faces that we want. We don't want to join, so we do body, hide that, go to Loft again. And then, and in this case, since this is the last leg, we can actually do to join. And the nice thing about join it is it'll automatically join all bodies that are in contact with it. So this is your last leg. It should look something like this. And then if we hit OK, you can see it went from like 5 different bodies to just 1. So now that we have our base complete, we are going to move on to start creating this kind of the dish itself and the pole that runs through it. And so to do that, the first thing we want to do is add, and just a disclaimer, this solar collector is just based on a picture I saw. It is completely, I guess, fictional. It's a very prototype that I just came up with my mind and designed from scratch. So this may or may not be like very mechanically accurate. But I decided to add a sphere, which you can do by going to create and you drop down to sphere, and this just allows you to create a sphere anywhere you want on a plane, of course. And so the plane I'm going to select is the upper base, and we want to do it right in the center, which can be seen by that circle. And so then we don't want to cut. This cutting will just create a hole. We actually want to, in this case, we could do a new body. And so we're gonna, you can drag it to as much as you want, or as little. In this case, I will do, actually we can do join just to make this easier, I think. Yeah. And so we can do something like this, maybe? Let's see. Again, this is just kind of like what I thought looked right. So that looks right. 23 millimeters. So we hit OK. And so a really kind of important design and overall CADing feature that's pretty useful to use is to create these other like planes. As you can see here, I used this plane to sketch out and create like everything else. So this way, like, so I can create these angles easily, basically, is what the function of this plane was. And so to do planes, you can do it from, there's a bunch of different ways. In this case, I'm going to be using you can do, there's a lot of them. We are going to use a plane tangent to a face at a point. And so the face that we want it to be tangent to is the sphere, and the point is going to be this like vertex of the sphere and the legs. So you can see that's the plane that we're going to use. And so now we have this plane, and so what we're also going to add is a point at the center of a circle, which can be found by going to construct, and it should be down here. And we're just going to add a center point to this sphere over here so we can have a little bit of a reference when we're drawing stuff. And so now we're going to create the pole that goes through, that holds the dish to the base. And to do that, we're going to sketch onto the plane that we just created. And we're going to click 2-point diameter circle, and we're going to click that center point that we just created as the first point. And you want to drag it out some distance. I kind of want a little bit of smaller rod, so we'll do 4 millimeters. And then if you want to see what you're drawing on, it typically helps, so we'll hide what we're doing for now. And so this is all we really need for now. And so now we're going to make that a 3D geometry by hitting extrude. And if you want to see what you're doing, you can unhide what we just did. And so in this case, we're going in the negative direction. For whatever reason, that's how AutoCAD defined it. And so you just want to go to some negative direction now. In this case, we'll go 70. At this point, we'll go back and edit this stuff, but for now, 70 is fine. And as you can see, it created, starting from this plane onward, this way to create that. And so, to make the next part easy, there's 2 ways you could do it. You can either draw more circles onto this plane and then offset them, or you can actually just offset the plane and then draw directly onto the plane at different areas. I typically would suggest offsetting the plane. In like this case, if I go to construction, I use 3 different planes to create everything, which is typically a lot more. It's a lot like easier than like kind of figuring out how much you want to offset it, doing it from the original plane. And so once again, we're going to go to construct, and we can hit offset plane, which allows us to like move this plane to different areas so we can draw on it. And so we can always go back and change it, which I will show later, but you want to offset it some distance, so it's like about, let's say here from the sphere. So we hit OK. And now we have 2 planes. And we're going to offset it again. And we're just going to do this one kind of a little bit. Actually, we can do this one a little bit wider. We can do it 15. And so now we have these 3 planes. And so the first thing we want to do is we're going to sketch onto the furthest plane. And once again, we're just going to draw some circle. We want this one to be kind of big, so just draw a little bit bigger circle. And then we're going to hit finish sketch. And now we have some circle along this axis. It hid the plane as it usually does. So if you need the plane to like kind of see where you're at, you can have that. In this case, I will hide it, and I will actually hide that sketch that we just did. You can also relabel the sketches if you want, so I think if you can. Oh yeah, you can. So in this case, we'll call this outer ring, just so we don't get confused later on. And so now we want to draw a sketch onto the inner ring. And so to do that, you hit sketch, click the plane you want to draw on, and we're going to draw a 2-point circle. And we actually want it to be the same size as our pole. So if we, it's kind of hard to see this really small circle from out here. So we zoom in and we see that this box tells us that it's the same size. And so once you're done with that, we can hit finish. And similar to before, we're going to hide this so it's easier for us to do what we're going to do right now. But once again, we're going to connect these two using the Loft feature. And so we're going to collect the 2 faces that we want to loft, and it should automatically create like this kind of cone for us here. And so we're going to hit OK, and if we unhide this body, it shows what it looks like. But as you can see from this is like hollow. And so to make it hollow, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the modify feature, and we're going to use shell. And shell does exactly what it sounds like. It creates like a hollow inside using some like 3D fill geometry. So in this case, we want to shell this, and the thickness inside basically tells you like how thick like this outer ring is and stuff. So we actually want it to be really, really thin. So what we're going to do is 0.5. As you can see, it automatically creates this really nice like shell for us. So if we unhide it, we can kind of see that we're getting here to where we want it to be. And so I also, let's see, where are my plans? So I also added a little circle onto this just so it gives us like, if we wanted to attach some stuff to the end, we have some like base to attach it to. And so to add that, we're going back to add sketch. I'm going to click the plane that we wanted to add it to. We're going to click circle. We want the center of the circle to be at the center. And we want it to be a little bit bigger than the pipe, but not obviously bigger than the entire object. So we'll just go with 6. And we hit escape to get rid of the drawing tool. And then we hit finish sketch. And now, to make that 3D, we're going to hit extrude, click the geometry we want, and we don't want to cut because that'll just make a giant hole there. So instead we want new body, and we don't want it to be very thick, so we'll just do 1 millimeter. As you can see, it automatically creates that little thing for us. And so one other thing we want to do is we kind of want to give this like a ball at the end, or a little bit of a I guess like sphere. And so I don't think it'll work with Fillit. Okay, yeah, it doesn't work with, I'll explain what Fillit does right now. It's actually a really nice tool too, but to do that ball, we're just going to do sphere again. Make sure you click the face that you want, and then the center, and it should, see, it's wanting to cut it. I don't know why it would want to cut it, it makes absolutely no sense, but we want to, in this case we want to join, and so we'll just give it some distance like that. And so it creates this nice little end cap for us basically. And so as I was saying, the Fillit tool over here is a really nice tool that gives you the smooth edges from round edges. So in this case, like if we don't want all these like rough edges around this thing, you can just go around and select them all. And what it does is, you can actually just pull it to see, but it creates like a nice like rounded edge for us. So this is pretty good for prototyping if you don't want, for safety concerns, if you don't want to like hurt the patient or whatever. So it automatically gives us that nice edge. And so obviously this doesn't really look much like the one I created earlier. And so an important tool that we can go back to use is the timeline tool, like I had mentioned. And so what this does is it allows us to go back and edit features, and then when we roll back, it'll automatically do everything that we've done already once again. So let's say I want to change the height of, the length of this like pipe. And so if I click it, I can see where I did this feature. And so if I roll this all the way back, you can see it deletes everything else that I've done, but don't worry, like you can always come back to it. And so we're going to edit the feature that we did. Let's say we don't want it to be this long. We actually want it to be, let's say 55. We can change it, and then when we roll back, it'll automatically add everything else we did for us. Like let's say we want to give this a little bit more of an angle. And so to get more angle, it actually has to do with this tangent plane, which is in reference to the ball on the corner edge. So if we click this, we can see it was made over here. So once again, we roll back to where we made it. We click edit feature. And so if we make the ball, I believe, bigger, it'll give us more of an angle to make that point and this ball tangent to each other. So if we roll all the way back, you can see that it made the ball a little bit bigger than I would have wanted, but it also interesting. Why did that not? I don't know why this is not attached to that. I thought I hit join body. Yeah, it is joined. Maybe new body. I'm actually not sure why that's. I'm pretty sure the sphere is untouched because it wasn't fully defined. So in this case, we'll just delete it. It's kind of strange though, but you can see that's what happens when you don't fully define features like that. It'll like end up in weird places when you go back and edit the timeline. So that's why it's really important to fully define features. So like your entire like base always like is connected to each other, or all the parts are connected to each other. And so like vice versa, like if I wanted to change like the shape of the cone, which is like from the sketch, I can go back to where we did it, right click, hit edit sketch. And an easy way to do it, which I should have done earlier, was to define it, which is sketch dimension. And I can make this, if I make this bigger and just hit OK, I can roll back the timeline and it creates this bigger cone for us. And so also another important thing is like to when you do the sketch dimensions, it allows you to go back and easily edit the features you did. And so this is pretty much looking like what we did earlier, just different size dimensions and stuff like that. I also added an axis just to see where everything was, but that wasn't completely necessary. But this pretty much completes this tutorial of the solder autoclave and how to use the different features of AutoCAD. If you have any other questions or concerns about this tutorial or any other tutorials, please don't hesitate to reach out to us and ask us. And yeah, thank you for watching this video.